The core piece of this episode will be me showing a custom modular pedal controller together with a making of. Before that, I will give a brief introduction on what pedal controllers are, where they originate from, and where they can be obtained. A pedal is essentially a foot-operated actuator which flips an electronic switch. When we think of an SPDT switch, it has three terminals: common, normally connected, and normally open. A very common design is connecting a controller function like, for example, the A button to the common terminal and connecting the normally open pin to ground. When the switch is pressed, the connection between common and normally closed is broken and a new connection to normally open is made. This causes the voltage of the button to drop to ground. The same thing happens if you press the corresponding button on your gamepad. Either the game console or a microcontroller notice the change in potential and considers the button then as being pressed and acts accordingly. As for the simplicity of this technique, many enthusiasts add a pedal to the light guns themselves. The usage of pedals for light gun games was popularized by the Time Crisis series of games. The arcade cabinets thereof used a big sturdy metal pedal which controls crouching and reloading in the game. Some third-party light guns copied this functionality for the console ports of the games and came with pedals. As the pedals were just mapped to the A button, soon people enjoyed using these devices also for games outside of the Time Crisis series. Light gun pedals were sold for years, and it shouldn't be difficult to pick one up on the usual second-hand markets if needed. A luxurious variant that comes into mind is the Red Octane PSTC Reload pedal, which acted as the cross button of a second player controller and thus could be paired with any gun for the Time Crisis games. If you prefer new items over used ones, I recommend industrial foot pedals as they are used for a slew of machines. I got sturdy, metal-made ones which I like very much. Some musical instruments, such as guitars, sometimes also use momentary switch pedals, which can be a great choice. Some of these use normally closed switches rather than normally open ones though, and thus require rewiring in order to work with light guns. Pay further attention to so-called expression pedals, which are potentiometer based, and thus are not very durable, typically lack springs, and may also require slight modifications before they can be used for light guns. Another exception are drum set control pedals. These usually don't use traditional switches but piezo elements, which I will discuss in a moment. For the Rock Band series of video games, Red Octane made some high quality pedals, which rely on magnetic reed switches. Reed switches consist of two metal contacts in a hermetically closed vessel. Bringing a magnet close to this vessel temporarily magnetizes the two contacts and causes them to close. I picked up a used Rock Band pedal, which sadly was broken because it had the reed contacts misaligned. By exposing the reed switch to a very strong magnet, I was able to fix it. Although there is an alleged compatibility between Rock Band and Guitar Hero pedals, you can't use the latter for light guns. This is because these iconic Red Octane made pedals are actually real drum pedals and thus rely on a piezo element. Pushing down the pedal onto the rubber plate creates a voltage, which other components pay attention to. It's important to understand that the pressure itself doesn't create any potential difference. The movement alone causes this. Thus, even if we would build an adapter for these kind of pedals, they still would be of very limited use. If the player would calmly keep the foot down, at some point the voltage would go back to zero and the A button wouldn't remain pressed. But even if we designed an adapter that latches, this doesn't solve the problem. In such a case, the A button would stop being depressed if the player was suddenly applying more force onto the already pressed pedal or moved the foot too much. Personally, I modified a Guitar Hero pedal by removing the piezo element and swapping it for a reed switch. The to be removed screws are below the cloth stickers. I machined a recess into the plunger and glued a magnet into it. Now, the Guitar Hero pedal behaves just like a Rock Band pedal. The diversity of connector types used on light guns for pedals is very high. Thus, the compatibility is limited and for many cases adapters are required. To solve this issue, I decided to make a modular pedal which is compatible to all light guns I am currently aware of. The back of it sports a matrix of dip switches. The top row controls at which contact the signal is fed in. The row below defines where ground is attached to. The toggle switch at the right hand side defines whether ground is connected to normally open or closed and thus whether A is pressed when the pedal is up or down. Instead of a normal 3.5mm TS socket, the pedal is using a full TRRS socket to support all 4 positions. Besides that, 8, 6 and 4 pin variations of RJ sockets are available. Last but not least, there is a mini-DIN 4 socket. As the PlayStation controller connector already gives away, inside the pedal is a PlayStation 1 controller PCB. For supported games, when connecting the pedal as player 2 using an extension cable, it can be paired with any GunCon compatible light gun, regardless the presence of a pedal socket. The rightmost dip switch banks define which button among circle, square, triangle and cross is tied to the switch. I chose the Time Crisis pedal as I like its look, the high quality, its historic significance, because it has lots of room for electronics, and because Time Crisis is my favorite game series of all time. As I didn't want to destroy a functional pedal, I bought a tatty one off eBay to restore. In its former life, the pedal seems to have been exposed to water a lot, and it corroded terribly. Much of the paint was coming loose. Even the corrosion-resistant faceplate corroded because it was in direct contact with ferric rust for years. I would like to highlight that restoring a bad condition pedal will not save you any money over buying a pristine one. The chemicals, dyes and tools used in conjunction with metal rework are more pricey than the difference in cost. If you want to make this as cheap as possible, consider buying a non-branded copy of this pedal. As a first step, I removed crude rust with a metal brush and sandpaper. I then removed the residual paint. To do so, I massaged the parts with paint-breaking chemicals, which I let soak in. In combination with sharp spatulas, I was able to peel some paint off. In average, I needed 5 runs of paint removal agent and spatula per part. Stub-on color residues were treated with a heat gun, sandpaper and metal brush. The paint removal agent is corrosive, so great care has to be put into washing it off in the end. As a next step, I applied a rust removal rust stop combo product. It is a green paste which I applied to the surface and then waited for 1 hour. After this time, the parts were washed again and then immediately dried to avoid new corrosion. Former rust stains and holes turn black in this step, which makes them less likely to continue rusting. Next, I applied a rust stop bluing agent paint primer combo product onto the parts. I used a spray can variant and a paintbrush variant where appropriate. Typically multiple coatings were necessary. In this step, many of the parts get oxidized and get a dark color. This outmost layer is somewhat protected against rusting and has a more stable grid structure than ferric rust. The dark color is the reason behind the nickname bluing. A varnish-like paint primer layer is formed, which also helps to avoid continuous corrosion. Next, I spray painted the parts with special anti-rust paint which is made for metal. This paint is very thin and takes a very long time to cure. A single layer takes close to 24 hours and an average of 5 layers were necessary per part. I painted the faceplate silver, the internals black and the outside red. Many of the screws were extremely corroded as well and it was very difficult to remove them. I replaced all screws and wave washers with new ones made of stainless steel or nylon. Instead of delicate Phillip heads, I chose hex bolts and Allen key screws. The original microswitch also got terribly corroded. I swapped it for a Cherry branded replacement. People sometimes ask me why I exclusively go for cherry in my designs. Let me demonstrate why I am so fond of those switches by connecting a multimeter onto the terminals of the original unit. Although the switch has corroded so much that the actuator arm almost comes off, the switch is still working and registering the input as there was no problem. I made the connection interface out of stripe board. For that, I test fitted the ports and then labeled where to cut the stripes. The cuts were made with an axial grinder. After spray painting the front of the interface, I fitted the connectors. Some of them are held with 2-component stone putty. I then soldered in the ports and wired them up. I enforced the portion around the PlayStation controller connector with solder to give the assembly further stability. I then test fitted the interface to the pedal and labeled where to cut out a window. Again, I used an axial grinder to make the cuts. I drilled holes into the interface and the frame of the window. Initially, I wanted to mount the interface against nuts, but as the metal of the pedal wall is sufficiently thick, I was able to cut threads into it. I took the PlayStation controller PCB from a classic SCPH 1080 model. These PCBs were made by Hosiden and are of a very high quality. Regardless, I cleaned the PCB and swapped the capacitor for a high quality, high temperature rated one made by Nichicon. With a multimeter, I found spots to break out the functions of the face buttons and ground. I wired everything up tidily and later connected it with the interface. To don't waste the remaining parts of the controller, I inserted the PCB of a cheap PlayStation knockoff USB controller into it. To do so, I had to desolder and swap the shoulder button portions of the controller. Apart from the new PCB, I solely used original ports including the buttons and membranes. This leaves me with a USB compatible PlayStation 1 controller, which is super authentic to use. With all parts ready, I reassembled the pedal and test fitted the 2 PCBs to determine the necessary amount of slag wire before shorting the cables down and connecting the 2 boards. New anti-slip pads avoid color being torn off the 4 feet. After a quick function test of the connections I will be using the most, I tightened the last remaining screws. I am very happy about how this pedal turned out. It was a huge effort, but in the end I think it was worth it. I will be able to use this pedal with the majority of my light guns and I'm looking very forward to it. This is the end of the video. My name is Ben. I thank you for viewing.